The village of Nzali was a place of peace and harmony, where traditions were respected and the people lived in unity. Among them were two sisters, Adana and Zuba, daughters of a humble but respected fisherman. Adana, the elder sister, was known for her kindness, beauty, and grace. She was loved by all who knew her, for her heart was pure, and she treated everyone with respect regardless of their status. Zuba, on the other hand, was the opposite of her sister. Though she was beautiful in her own right, her heart was consumed by jealousy. She resented the way people adored Adana, how they spoke of her with admiration, and how their father always praised her gentle nature. In Zuba's eyes, Adana was the reason she always stood in the shadows, unnoticed and unloved. The bitterness in her heart grew each passing day. As the sisters came of age, the chief's son Obesai sought a bride. It was tradition that the most virtuous young woman in the village would be chosen for such a prestigious marriage. All the eligible girls prepared themselves, hoping to be selected, but deep down, everyone knew there was only one true choice, Adana. She was beautiful inside and out, and her reputation for kindness made her the obvious bride for the future chief. When the elders made their decision and Obesai presented his marriage proposal, the village rejoiced. Adana was honored and humbled, grateful that she had been chosen to stand beside a man who would one day lead their people. But while the village celebrated, Zuba seethed in silence. She had always lived in Adana's shadow, and now she would lose everything to her sister once again. The jealousy that had once been a small ember in her heart turned into a raging fire. One evening, a few days before the wedding, Zuba lured Adana to the riverbanks, pretending she wanted to collect fresh water for their father. The moonlight reflected on the water, casting an eerie glow as the two sisters walked along the edge. Adana, trusting and unsuspecting, carried the water pots, smiling as she spoke about her excitement for the future. But Zuba wasn't listening. Her hands trembled with anticipation, and her heart pounded in her chest. This was her moment. If Adana disappeared, the village would mourn, but in time they would move on. And without her, Zuba believed she would finally have a chance to shine, to take the place that should have been hers. In one swift motion she shoved Adana forward. Adana gasped as she lost her footing, her arms flailing as she tumbled into the river. The water was cold and merciless, pulling her under as she struggled to breathe. She reached out, hoping her sister would pull her back to safety, but Zuba only stood there watching. For a moment, guilt flickered in Zuba's heart, but she quickly pushed it away. She turned and ran, leaving the river behind. As far as she was concerned, Adana was gone forever. Back at the village, Zuba wiped her tears and screamed in despair, telling everyone that Adana had been swept away by the current. The village mourned, believing they had lost their beloved Adana to the unforgiving river. Adana's body was engulfed by the roaring river, the icy water stealing her breath as she tumbled through the relentless currents. She fought desperately, her arms flailing in an attempt to reach the surface, but the river was merciless. The weight of her soaked garments dragged her down, and the force of the water battered her from every side. She gasped for air whenever she managed to break the surface, but each breath was short-lived as another powerful wave crashed over her. Her limbs ached, her strength waning with each passing second. The river was vast, stretching far beyond her village, leading into the unknown. Fear gripped her heart as she realized that no one would come to save her. She was truly alone. As the current pulled her deeper into its endless depths, she caught sight of a floating log drifting ahead of her. Summoning what little energy she had left, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough bark. With a final desperate effort, she latched onto it, clinging for dear life. The log became her only hope, keeping her above the surface as the river carried her farther and farther from home. The night was long and brutal. The river showed no mercy, tossing her from side to side as it twisted through dense forests and rocky cliffs. Adana's grip never loosened, but her body trembled from exhaustion, hunger, and the freezing cold. Her vision blurred, and darkness crept into the edges of her mind. How long had it been? Hours? A day? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had to survive. At some point, the river's wrath began to fade. The waters calmed, and the once violent currents became gentle waves. But Adana was too weak to notice. Her arms, stiff from gripping the log for so long, finally gave in. Her body slackened, and she slipped into unconsciousness, floating aimlessly through the water like a fallen leaf. Days passed before Adana's body finally drifted to the river's edge, where the waters kissed the shores of an unknown land. The sun was high in the sky when she washed up on a quiet riverbank, her frail form tangled in reeds and wet sand. She lay motionless, her breath faint, her skin pale. It was here that fate intervened once again. A group of people, clad in garments unfamiliar to her, were traveling along the riverbank when they spotted her. One of them, an elderly man with wise eyes, rushed forward, sensing that she was still alive. "She is not of our land," he murmured, observing her features. "But the river has brought her to us for a reason." The others hesitated, unsure whether to interfere, but the old man's wife, a healer, knelt beside Adana and pressed her fingers to the girl's wrist. A weak pulse beat beneath her fingertips. "She is barely holding on," she whispered. "We must help her." With great care, they lifted Adana's frail body and carried her through the dense trees to their village, a hidden settlement nestled within the forest. When they arrived, the healer took Adana into her home, where she carefully cleaned her wounds and wrapped her in warm blankets. The village gathered outside, whispering amongst themselves about the mysterious girl who had appeared from the river. Some believed she was a gift from the spirits, while others feared she was an omen of change. Days passed and Adana remained unconscious, trapped in a deep slumber as her body fought to recover. The healer never left her side, tending to her with the gentleness of a mother caring for her own child. And then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adana's eyes fluttered open. She gasped, her body aching with every movement. She did not recognize the ceiling above her, nor the scent of unfamiliar herbs lingering in the air. Panic surged through her veins as she tried to sit up, but a soothing voice stopped her. "Rest, child," the healer murmured, placing a warm hand on her forehead. "You are safe now." Adana blinked, trying to comprehend what had happened. Her last memory was of the river, of the betrayal that had sent her into its depths. And yet here she was, alive, breathing. She wanted to ask where she was, who these people were, and why they had saved her. But for now, all she could do was exhale, relief washing over her like the gentlest of waves. Adana awoke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through intricately woven curtains. The air smelled of exotic flowers and burning incense, and the bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever known. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming. She sat up slowly, her body still sore from her ordeal in the river. As her vision cleared, she took in her surroundings, a grand chamber with high, golden-etched ceilings, walls decorated with vibrant tapestries, and floors covered in silken rugs. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen in her village. It radiated wealth, power, and something else, something ancient. Before she could gather her thoughts, the door creaked open, and a woman dressed in fine robes entered. She carried a tray of food, the scent of fresh bread and spiced fruits filling the air. "You are awake," the woman said with a warm smile. "The kingdom has been waiting for you." Adana's brows furrowed. "The kingdom?" Her voice was hoarse as though she hadn't spoken in days. The woman placed the tray beside her and gestured for her to eat. "You have traveled a long way, child. Eat first and soon you will have your answers." Though confusion swirled in Adana's mind, hunger won over. She took small bites, savoring flavors she had never tasted before. As she ate, her memories slowly returned. The betrayal, the river, the strangers who had found her. But she was no longer in the simple village she had been taken to. She was somewhere else entirely. Hours later, after she had regained some of her strength, she was led through the grand corridors of the palace. The walls gleamed under the soft glow of torches, their carvings depicting stories she did not recognize. Every servant she passed bowed their heads slightly, as though they already knew who she was. Eventually she was brought before the royal family, King Odunan and Queen Esh, who sat on thrones carved from precious stone. The king was regal and imposing, his robes embroidered with golden patterns that shimmered in the light. The queen, seated beside him, held an air of wisdom, her gaze studying Adana with quiet intensity. Adana hesitated, unsure of what to do. She dropped to her knees out of respect, though her heart pounded in confusion. "Rise, child," the king said, his voice deep and steady. "There is no need for formalities. You are our guest." Adana stood, her hands clasped together. "Where am I? And why have you brought me here?" The queen leaned forward, her piercing eyes locking onto Adana's. "You were not brought here by accident, child. The river led you to us." "The river?" Adana repeated, her thoughts racing. "But I thought I was going to die." "The river is not just water," the king explained. "It carries the will of the ancestors. And they have chosen you." Adana's head spun. "Chosen me? For what?" The queen exchanged a knowing glance with the king before answering. "This is the hidden kingdom of Yuduma, a place lost to the world beyond these mountains. Few outsiders have ever set foot here. And yet here you stand. Adana struggled to process their words. A hidden kingdom? A place untouched by the outside world? It seemed impossible. And yet, something in her heart stirred, a strange sense of familiarity as though she belonged here. You are special, Adana, the king continued. Your arrival has awakened an old prophecy. Adana's breath caught in her throat. A prophecy? The queen nodded. Long ago, it was foretold that a lost daughter of the river would return to Yiduma in its time of need. That she would bring balance and restore the kingdom's forgotten legacy. Adana shook her head. That cannot be me. I am just a girl from a small village. The queen's lips curled into a small smile. Perhaps. But the river does not make mistakes. Adana felt her heartbeat quicken. She had spent her entire life believing she was ordinary, nothing more than a village girl with no grand destiny. And yet, here she was, standing in a palace, being told she had a greater purpose. The river spared you, the king said. And now we must know why. If you are truly the one foretold in the prophecy, you must prove it. Adana swallowed hard. Prove it? How? The queen's gaze hardened. Through trials of wisdom, strength, and heart. Only then will we know if you are meant to rule. Adana's breath hitched. She had never dreamed of such a thing. She had only wanted a simple, happy life. But the universe seemed to have other plans. Her mind raced back to Zuba, the sister who had tried to kill her. If she had truly been spared for a reason, was this it? I don't know if I am the one you seek, Adana admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I will face your trials. The king nodded approvingly. Then let the ancestors decide. As Adana left the throne room, her heart was filled with uncertainty. But deep down she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. As dawn broke over the hidden kingdom of Yiduma, the palace courtyard buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread that the mysterious girl from the river was to undergo the sacred trials, an ancient test reserved only for those destined for greatness. The people gathered in the grand arena, their whispers filling the air like the rustling of leaves. Some were doubtful, others curious, but all were eager to witness whether this stranger was truly the one foretold in the prophecy. Adana stood at the center of it all, her heart pounding in her chest. Though she had agreed to the trials, she still struggled to believe she belonged in this place. How could she, a simple village girl, be destined for anything more than an ordinary life? But there was no turning back now. The king and queen watched from their thrones, their expressions unreadable. The king rose, his voice commanding silence. Adana of the river, you shall face 3 trials. One of courage, one of wisdom, and one of heart. Only if you pass them all shall your destiny be revealed. Adana swallowed hard but nodded. She would not fail. The trial of courage. The first challenge was a test of bravery. The palace guards led Adana to a vast enclosure, where a massive iron gate loomed before her. The crowd hushed in anticipation. Behind the gate, a deep, guttural growl echoed. Adana felt a shiver run down her spine. The first trial, the king announced, is to tame the beast. The gates creaked open, revealing a great lion, its golden mane flowing like fire. The beast stepped forward, its amber eyes locked onto Adana, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. The crowd gasped, some whispering that she was doomed. Adana's pulse raced, but she refused to move. Running would only provoke it. Instead, she stood her ground, her mind searching for a way to calm the creature. She had always been good with animals in her village. She remembered how her grandmother once told her that all living things understood kindness. Slowly, she knelt down, making herself appear smaller. She did not challenge the lion but instead extended her hand, palm up, in a gesture of peace. The beast growled, pacing around her, but she did not flinch. "Shoo," she whispered, her voice gentle but steady. "I mean you no harm." The lion stopped. Its ears twitched. Then, to everyone's amazement, it stepped forward and pressed its massive head against her hand. The crowd gasped in disbelief. The queen smiled knowingly. The beast had accepted her. She had passed the first trial. The trial of wisdom. Adana barely had time to recover before she was led into a grand hall, where the kingdom's wisest elders awaited. In the center of the room stood an ancient stone tablet covered in strange symbols. For generations, the head scholar said, this riddle has remained unsolved. If you can answer it, you shall prove your wisdom. Adana stepped forward and studied the symbols. They formed an intricate pattern, each line connecting to another like a great woven tapestry. She traced them with her fingers, letting her mind settle. Then she saw it. The riddle was not just words, it was a story. The lines told of a lost princess, a girl from the river who would return to unite the two lands. Her own story. Her breath caught. Could this prophecy be about her? She turned to the elders. The answer, she said, voice firm, is the one who was lost and found. A hush fell over the hall. The head scholar's eyes widened. That is correct. Another trial passed. The trial of heart. For the final test, Adana was led to the outskirts of the city, where the poorest of the kingdom lived. Unlike the grandeur of the palace, these streets were filled with those struggling to survive. Orphans, widows, the sick and weary. The queen herself stood beside her. This trial, she said softly, is not one of strength or knowledge but of heart. A true leader does not ignore the suffering of her people. Show us what kind of ruler you would be. Adana did not hesitate. She walked among the people, listening to their stories, comforting the children, and offering what little she had. When she saw a hungry boy, she gave him her own meal. When she met an elderly woman with torn sandals, she took off her own and placed them on the woman's feet. The crowd watched in silence. By the end of the day there was no doubt, Adana was not just kind, she was selfless. When she returned to the palace, the king and queen stood to greet her. You have done more than pass the trials, the queen said, eyes filled with emotion. You have proven that you are the one the ancestors have chosen. Adana bowed her head, her heart full. She had come from nothing, had been cast away by her own sister, yet here she stood, stronger than ever. The great hall of the hidden kingdom was filled with an air of solemnity and wonder. Every elder, noble and warrior had gathered beneath the towering golden chandeliers, their eyes fixed on Adana. Though she had passed the sacred trials, she still struggled to grasp the weight of it all. She had entered this land as a lost girl, cast away by her own sister. Now, she stood before a council of elders, waiting for the revelation that would change her life forever. The eldest of the council, a man with silver hair and robes embroidered with ancient symbols, stepped forward. He carried a scroll that had been sealed for generations. With careful hands he broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The hall fell silent as he began to speak. The prophecy of our ancestors speaks of a daughter lost to the river, a princess hidden from sight, yet destined to return in our time of need. His voice echoed through the chamber. She shall pass the 3 trials of destiny, proving her courage, wisdom, and heart. She will wear the golden crown of the lost kingdom and reunite the 2 lands. A murmur spread through the hall. Some nodded in agreement as if they had long suspected this truth. Others stared at Adana in awe. The elder turned his gaze to her. Adana, you are that princess. You are the daughter of our last true king, stolen away as a baby and lost to the river. Your return fulfills the prophecy. Adana's breath caught in her throat. Could this truly be? She had no memory of royal lineage, no recollection of being taken from a palace. Her earliest memories were of her village, of her simple life alongside Zuba. Yet deep in her heart, something stirred, an unspoken connection to this land, to these people. The queen, who had watched Adana with soft, knowing eyes, stepped forward. When you arrived, we sensed something special about you. Now we understand why. You are our rightful queen. A hush fell over the chamber as the realization set in. Adana trembled, not out of fear but out of the sheer magnitude of it all. She had spent her whole life feeling unworthy, cast aside, unwanted. And yet, here she was, being told she was destined for greatness. The golden crown, a symbol of the kingdom's lost royalty, was brought forth on a velvet cushion. It gleamed under the firelight, encrusted with ancient symbols of the sun, the river, and the lion, the same lion she had tamed in her trial. The moment had come. The king stepped forward. Adana of the river, rightful heir to the throne, do you accept your destiny? She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the weight of the question to settle over her. Then, with steady hands, she lifted the crown and placed it upon her own head. The hall erupted into cheers. The warriors beat their shields in salute. The nobles bowed their heads. The common folk, who had been allowed into the great hall to witness the coronation, wept tears of joy. For the first time in generations, their true queen had returned. Meanwhile, in the village, far from the hidden kingdom, Zuba walked through the marketplace of their home village, her heart light and her mind free of guilt. It had been months since she had pushed Adana into the river, and life had only gotten better for her. With Adana gone, she no longer had to compete for attention or praise. She no longer had to hear people compare them, saying Adana was the kinder or the more beautiful sister. She had taken Adana's place in every way that mattered. Now, suitors came to her, men who had once admired Adana but now turned their affections toward her instead. She had spent her days basking in admiration, wearing the finest fabrics, and enjoying the life she had always believed she deserved. As she strolled past the market stalls, she heard whispers, rumors of a powerful new queen who had risen in a distant land. She came from nowhere, an old woman said, and now she rules with wisdom and strength. They say she passed the 3 sacred trials, a man added, shaking his head in amazement. She is a true queen. Zuba scoffed, rolling her eyes. What did it matter? It was probably some distant kingdom that had nothing to do with her. Still, something about the story made her uneasy. She shook the thought away and returned to her carefree life. She had won. Adana was gone and she was the one who remained. Little did she know, her sister had not only survived but had returned as a queen with a destiny far greater than anyone had imagined. And soon she would come back to the village, not as the girl Zuba had betrayed, but as the ruler who would change everything. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village as people gathered in the marketplace. It was an ordinary day, until the sound of distant drums echoed through the air. The villagers turned toward the horizon, their conversations falling silent. The rhythmic beat of the drums grew louder, sending a ripple of unease through the crowd. Warriors in shining armor rode into view, their banners waving proudly in the wind. Behind them came chariots adorned in gold, their wheels carving a regal path through the dusty roads. At the heart of the procession sat a woman unlike any they had ever seen. She was draped in flowing royal robes, embroidered with the symbols of an ancient kingdom. A golden crown sat upon her head, its jewels sparkling like the stars. She rode a magnificent horse, its coat as dark as the night, moving with the grace of a queen. The villagers gasped, their eyes widening in disbelief. It was Adana. The girl they had presumed dead, the girl many had pitied, mocked, or forgotten, had returned. But she was no longer the humble, soft-spoken girl they once knew. She carried herself with the confidence of a ruler, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the land of her past. Whispers spread like wildfire. How is this possible? She was lost to the river. She's a queen now? A true ruler? As Adana's procession moved toward the village square, the people knelt instinctively, sensing her authority. The sight of their former neighbor, now transformed into a figure of undeniable power, left them in awe. But no one was more shaken than Zuba. She had been arranging her jewelry at the market stall when she heard the whispers. At first she dismissed them as nonsense, another tale of a far-off ruler with no connection to her life. But as the whispers grew louder, dread began to creep into her heart. Then she heard the name. Adana. Her hands froze, a bracelet slipping through her fingers and clattering onto the wooden stall. She turned, her body stiff with terror, and forced herself to look toward the procession. And there she was, alive. Zuba's world tilted, her breath coming in short gasps. This could not be real. Adana was supposed to be gone forever, lost to the merciless river. Yet, here she was, adorned in riches, commanding warriors, and carrying a presence that made the very earth seem to bow beneath her feet. Panic seized Zuba as Adana's gaze met hers. There was no hatred in Adana's eyes, no anger or wrath. Instead there was something far worse, knowledge. Adana knew what Zuba had done. And now she had returned, not as a helpless girl seeking revenge, but as a queen who would decide Zuba's fate. The air around them grew thick with tension. Adana dismounted her horse, her golden robes flowing as she stepped forward. The village elder, who had known her since childhood, cautiously approached. His voice trembled as he spoke. Adana, it is truly you? She nodded, her voice steady. Yes, elder. I have returned. A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. The elder fell to his knees, followed by the villagers one by one. The gods have sent you back to us, an old woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. Forgive us, child. Adana looked over the faces of the people who had once doubted her, pitied her, or ignored her suffering. Now they bowed before her, their expressions filled with awe and regret. But there was one face among them that had gone pale with fear. Zuba remained frozen in place, her lips slightly parted, her body trembling. She was the only one who had not knelt. Adana walked toward her, each step slow and deliberate. The crowd parted, making way for the moment of reckoning. Sister, Adana said at last, her voice gentle yet firm. Zuba flinched at the word. I, she stammered, but the words refused to come. For months she had lived without guilt, believing she had rid herself of the one person who had always overshadowed her. Now, standing before the very sister she had betrayed, she felt her soul shrink under Adana's unwavering gaze. Adana's eyes held no vengeance, no burning rage. They simply saw through her, stripping away every mask Zuba had ever worn. "Did you mourn me?" Adana asked, her tone unreadable. Zuba's breath hitched. She wanted to lie, to pretend she had spent nights weeping over her lost sister. But something in Adana's presence made lying impossible. Zuba's voice cracked. "I thought you were gone." Adana studied her for a long moment before turning to the gathered villagers. "Tell me," she said, her voice carrying across the square, "when I was gone, did this village suffer? Did anyone fall ill with grief? Did anyone search for me?" The silence that followed was deafening. No one had looked for her. No one had cared enough to question her sudden disappearance. Their shame was heavy in the air. The elder lowered his head. "We failed you, Adana." Adana exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had returned to the village not for revenge but for closure. She had come to see with her own eyes whether the place she once called home had truly valued her. The answer was clear. "Zuba," Adana said at last, turning back to her sister. "Do you regret what you did?" Tears welled up in Zuba's eyes. She could no longer run from the truth. "I do," she whispered. "I was jealous. I was cruel. And now, I am nothing compared to you." Adana studied her for a long moment. The villagers held their breath, waiting to see what their returned queen would do. Then, in a voice filled with both strength and grace, Adana spoke. "You are not nothing, Zuba. But you must live with the weight of your choices." She turned to the villagers. "As must you all." The words cut deeper than any blade. Adana had come back not to seek revenge, but to remind them of what they had lost. Not just a girl, but a future queen they had never recognized. And now they could do nothing but kneel before her in reverence. The village square was silent. Every eye was on Adana as she stood before the elders, her golden robes gleaming under the sun. Her presence commanded both fear and admiration. She had returned not as the girl they had once dismissed, but as a queen, one who now held the power to decide the fate of those who had wronged her. Before her, Zuba knelt, her face pale and her body trembling. The weight of her actions hung over her like a storm cloud, suffocating and inescapable. She could feel the eyes of the entire village on her, some filled with judgment, others with curiosity. One of the village elders stepped forward, his voice firm but cautious. "Queen Adana," he said, bowing respectfully, "your return is a miracle, a sign from the gods. But justice must be served. Your sister committed a grave betrayal. The punishment for such treachery has always been exile, or death." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The laws of the village were clear. Such an act of attempted murder could not go unpunished. Zuba flinched, her fingers digging into the dirt beneath her knees. Exile meant being cast into the wild, left to fend for herself with no home, no family, and no protection. Death. She didn't even want to think about that possibility. She dared to glance up at Adana, hoping for mercy but unable to voice her plea. The queen remained silent for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice calm yet powerful. "There will be no exile. No execution." Gasps filled the air. The elders exchanged confused looks as did the villagers. Zuba's breath caught in her throat. Adana stepped forward, looking down at her sister with something that was not quite pity, but not quite cruelty either. "Exile would be too easy," she said. "And death would teach you nothing." She turned to the elders. "Justice is not about vengeance. It is about balance. About restoring what was broken, not simply destroying what caused the pain." The elders hesitated. This was not the response they had expected. But they could not argue with the wisdom in her words. Adana turned back to Zuba. "You betrayed me because you wished to see me fall," she said. "But instead I rose higher than either of us could have imagined. You were driven by envy, by pride, by the desire to have more than what was meant for you." Zuba swallowed hard, her head bowing in shame. Adana's voice softened, but it remained firm. "If you are to remain in this village, you must understand what it means to truly serve others. You must know the pain of those who have suffered, the weight of those who have been cast aside." She gestured toward a group of villagers standing near the edge of the crowd. They were the poorest of the poor, the widows, the orphans, the ones who had been ignored and left to struggle. "For 1 year," Adana declared, "Zuba will serve these people. She will live among them, eat as they eat, work as they work. She will learn humility through service, and only then will she be forgiven." A stunned silence followed her words. Zuba's face burned with humiliation, but she did not dare argue. It was a punishment far better than exile or death, yet it still felt unbearable. She, who had once been proud and selfish, would now have to bow to those she had looked down upon. The village elders, though initially hesitant, nodded in agreement. "This is wisdom," one of them admitted. "A lesson greater than any punishment we could have given." The villagers murmured among themselves. Many still thought Zuba deserved worse, but they could not deny the justice in Adana's decision. The queen had not returned for revenge, she had returned to lead. The lesson in humility. The first days of Zuba's new life were the hardest. She was stripped of her fine clothing and given the simplest garments. Instead of waking up to comfort, she woke to the cries of hungry children, the weight of endless chores, and the harsh reality of life among the people she had once scorned. She fetched water from the river, her hands blistering from carrying heavy pots. She worked in the fields under the scorching sun, her back aching from bending over for hours. She scrubbed floors, prepared meals, and tended to the sick, all things she had never done before. At first she resented every moment. She hated the stares, the whispers, the way people watched her struggle, waiting to see if she would break. But as the days passed, something within her began to change. She saw the kindness of the villagers, the way they shared what little they had, the way they helped one another without expecting anything in return. She saw the struggles they endured, the hardships they faced daily, and she began to understand the true meaning of strength. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never known before. Gratitude. She had taken so much for granted. Her family, her home, her privileges. And in her envy, she had nearly destroyed the one person who had always cared for her. One evening, as she sat by the fire with the children she had been assigned to care for, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Will you tell us a story?" the child asked, her wide eyes hopeful. Zuba hesitated. She had never been one to entertain others, but as she looked into the faces of the children, faces filled with innocence and trust, she felt something stir within her. And so, she told them a story. Not of queens or warriors, but of two sisters, one who had let jealousy rule her heart, and the other who had found strength in kindness. By the time she finished, the children were silent, their eyes full of wonder. Zuba swallowed the lump in her throat. For the first time she realized she was not just serving a sentence. She was becoming someone new. The village flourishes. While Zuba learned her lesson, Adana wasted no time in ensuring the village thrived. She introduced new ways of farming, helping the villagers grow better crops. She ensured that no one went hungry, using the wealth of her kingdom to provide food and resources. She encouraged education, making sure even the poorest children could learn to read and write. Under her rule, the village transformed. Those who had once been overlooked were now valued. Those who had once been divided by jealousy and greed found unity. And those who had once doubted Adana now saw her for what she truly was, a queen not just by birth but by heart. Her wisdom spread beyond the village, reaching other lands. People traveled from afar to seek her guidance, to witness the woman who had turned betrayal into wisdom, pain into strength. And in the midst of it all, Zuba continued to serve. Until one day, a year after her punishment had begun, she knelt before Adana once more, this time not out of fear but out of true repentance. "Sister," Zuba whispered, her voice trembling, "I am sorry." Adana looked down at her, the pain of the past still lingering, but no longer controlling her heart. "You are forgiven," she said simply. And with those words, the weight lifted from both their souls. A story that lives forever. As the years passed, Adana's legend only grew. She ruled with fairness and wisdom, ensuring that no one was ever treated as she had been. She became a symbol of justice, of mercy, of the belief that fate did not just belong to the powerful, but to those who proved themselves worthy of it. Her story was told across generations, whispered by mothers to daughters, by grandmothers to grandsons. She was the girl who was betrayed, they would say. The girl who was lost to the river but returned wearing a golden crown. And so, Adana's name lived on, not just as a queen but as a lesson for all who heard it. A lesson that kindness would always triumph. That justice did not mean cruelty. And that even the deepest wounds could heal, if given the chance.